Welcome back to the Truth Tank. I am your host, The Tank. This is episode 5 of the Truth Tank. This is the fourth and final part of the Star Wars The Betrayal of the Mouse series. I've talked way too long about Star Wars in this podcast. I know I said there was going to be a lot of history, aliens, conspiracies, etc. I just had a bit more to say about it, but this is well and truly the last one on the subject of Star Wars. So this episode we'll be looking at some of the problems that have arisen at Lucasfilm under Kathleen Kennedy's leadership since the Disney takeover in 2012. We'll also be having a look at some of the production and budgeting problems that have happened since Kathleen Kennedy took over, and the firing of several directors who have had creative differences with Kathleen Kennedy, and some of the problems that came about in the production of Rogue One and Solo: A Star Wars Story. We'll be starting tonight's show with a quick review and recap of Rogue One: A Star Wars Story and Solo: A Star Wars Story. Before we get into that, a big thank you to everyone that made it through to the end of the 3 hours and 21 minutes of the last episode. Big thank you, it means a lot if you did listen. Just before we get into it, the Truth Tank needs your help. The Truth Tank needs iTunes and Podbean reviews, it needs likes, and it needs shares on social media, email, whatever. Spread the word about the Truth Tank, get it out there. So if you have a friend that might be interested in this show, share it to them, share it to your Facebook pages, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. Spread the word and get it out. Alright, so let's waste no more time. Let's get into tonight's episode. This is Star Wars: The Betrayal, The Mouse, Part 4. One of the Star Wars films that Disney produced that I actually did like is Rogue One: A Star Wars Story. Rogue One is set in between episodes 3 and 4 and revolves around a group of rebels stealing the plans for the Death Star. This is mentioned in the title crawl of A New Hope, and they've taken one sentence and turned it into a film. It's great. It's not without its criticisms. I like the characters. There's a lot of people saying, this is too diverse and whatever. Yeah, well, I didn't really see a problem with it. It was good to see some fresh faces in Star Wars. I mean, not like I ever think there was a problem with Star Wars to begin with. Just the manufactured problems of Kathleen Kennedy and Disney, as they like to subject their audiences to. They like to think there's a problem with the way things are going and how things are done, so they feel like they have to change it and force their politics down everybody's throat. But I've said that enough. A lot of people have said the character of Jyn Erso was very unlikable and what have you. I disagree. I think she was a realistic character. She was portrayed very well. She's a far better and more likable character than Rey. Jyn gets her ass kicked repeatedly through the film. She's not a Mary Sue. She can't do everything by herself. The characters are well rounded out. There's some great bad guys with Australia's Ben Mendelsohn as director Orson Krennic. It has Darth Vader in it. What's not to like? I think that they used Darth Vader as a marketing tool, which ultimately paid off because the film grossed nearly $1 billion. It had a far better box office total than Solo: A Star Wars Story. It was good. We got some new locations. They thought outside the box. We have the first tropical planet in Star Wars. We have a rainy, rocky planet, a planet that looks like Iceland, a giant asteroid. There's the Imperial Labour Camp. There's some great stuff in this film. It's very entertaining. Death Troopers are cool. It's well directed. However, it's not without its controversy. Towards the end of production, Kathleen Kennedy fired the director Gareth Edwards and hired second unit director Tony Gilroy to reshoot the end of the film. For whatever reasons, this has never really been touched upon. Apparently Kathleen Kennedy wasn't happy with the way it turned out, so there's probably a differing of ideas. Yeah, so there's an unnecessary reshoot to the end of the film, which obviously drives the production costs up. Just a good thing that the film made nearly $1 billion. I'll come to this in a minute, but this is Kathleen Kennedy dropping the ball in production. Yes, if there was a problem with production, she should have been there earlier on to see said problem. So now we come to Solo, a Star Wars story. To say that this movie was underwhelming would be an understatement. Solo was a financial disaster. The film grossed a worldwide box office total of just $392,924,807. Wow. Given that The Force Awakens, I think, is top 5 highest grossing films of all time, it made like a 2.2 or $2.5 billion in 11 weeks or something like that. The Last Jedi was technically a financial failure, as it only made 1.4 billion in its theatrical release, and that would be, great for any film, 1.4 billion, but for Star Wars that is a economic failure. Most Star Wars films should easily gross over the $1 billion mark. All the prequels have grossed over $1 billion. Rogue One nearly got there at $1 billion. It was just under the $1 billion mark. As I just said, Force Awakens. Key point about The Last Jedi is its second week drop-off. The second week drop-off was so high, if we're going to compare that to the second and third weeks of the prequel releases, it's a huge drop-off. It was nearly like a 30 to 40% drop-off, because old school fans and hardcore Star Wars fans weren't coming back to see it 2, 3, 4 and 5 times. This started with the originals. I mean, you have people who would see the film multiple times on the opening day or the opening weekend. I mean, hell, I saw Revenge of the Sith 3 times in 4 days. And I've seen, I think, every Star Wars film multiple times in the theatre except for The Force Awakens, Rogue One and The Last Jedi and Solo. Rogue One I would have loved to see more than once, but going to the movies is expensive. I had too much trepidation about seeing The Force Awakens a second time. I just really didn't like that film. Even though it was Star Wars, I tried to talk myself into going to see it again, and by that time it came out to buy, which, I brought on Blu-ray, because I'm a hardcore loyal fan. So, Solo was in theatres for 7 weeks and grossed under $400 million. The film's production costs were $275 to $300 million for the film. For the film to be profitable, it would have had to have grossed $500 million. The film only grossed a few million more than the budget. Wow, if you're in the accounting department at Lucasfilm, you'd be scratching your head wondering, where did we fuck up? Like I said, if this was any other film apart from Star Wars, I mean, even $500 million would be great. That's a massive amount to make. But for these, super blockbusters that have so much special effects in their budget to... a standard budget for an action film now is $250 million. These films have got to be making $700-800 million for the studios to justify putting the budget into the production. That's fucking stupid. Like, they've gone so big and so greedy that $500 million is loose change for these films. So $500 million. I wonder why this film only made $500 million. Why could that have been? The answer... This is mainly due to the film being shot twice, essentially. The original directors were fired near the end of the production and replaced with Ron Howard. If you don't take my word for it, this comes from the Wikipedia page on the start about Solo, a Star Wars story. Star Wars creator George Lucas began developing a Han Solo prequel in 2012 and commissioned Lawrence Kasdan to write the screenplay. After Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney in 2012, Kasdan was hired to write Star Wars The Force Awakens, leaving his son Jonathan to complete the Solo script. Principal photography began in January 2017 at Pinewood Studios, directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller. The duo were fired in June 2017 following creative differences with Lucasfilm, and Ron and Howard was hired as their replacement, with an estimated production budget of at least $275 million. Solo is one of the most expensive films ever made. This supports what I was just saying. Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, the writers and directors of 21 and 22 Jump Street and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and I think the Lego films, they were hired to make Solo. Apparently they had a pretty good original script that was a little darker and more edgier than probably what Disney wanted, but yet they were fired towards the end of production. Why wasn't Kathleen Kennedy around there to shut down the production when the problems first arose, rather than waiting till the film is 85 to 90% complete before stepping in to do anything? And yet, it's one of the most expensive movies ever made because your producer had no fucking idea what she was doing. The expenditure blew out beyond what would have been acceptable even by Star Wars standards. You got to ask yourself, how did she drop the ball so badly? Why wasn't she there at the start? Why wasn't she there at all for production? It seems like she was just not... Kathleen Kennedy wasn't even present for most of the filming or any of it. And creative differences, yes, let's just fire them rather than hiring someone to reshoot the end of it or whatever. Or could the Lord and Miller version of Solo have been that bad that it justified reshooting the entire film and hiring someone of Ron Howard's caliber to take over? I mean, Ron Howard reshot 70% of the film. You could have made 3 films for the Solo budget. But this, I guess, Disney doesn't care about money, and neither does Kathleen Kennedy. On June 20, 2017, citing creative differences, Lucasfilm announced that the directors had left the project with a new director, to be announced soon. It was reported that the directors were fired after Kennedy and Kasdan disagreed with their shooting style. Lord and Miller believed they were hired to make a comedy film, while Lucasfilm was looking for the duo only to add a comedic touch. Lucasfilm also felt that directors were encouraging too much improvisation from the actors, which was believed to be shifting the story off course from the Kasdan script. To appease Kasdan, who was unhappy with the scenes not being filmed word for word, Lord and Miller shot several takes exactly as written, and then shot additional takes. Lord and Miller refused to compromise on certain scenes, such as filming a scene from fewer angles than Lucasfilm expected, thereby reducing the options available in editing. The duo were also unhappy when Kasdan was brought to the London set feeling he became a shadow director. The decision to remove Lord and Miller was made after a short hiatus in filming, taking to review the footage so far. In my mind, I'm seeing this as this Lucasfilm is a pretty toxic environment. It sounds like it's a pretty shit place to work, and it's pretty shit to work under Kathleen Kennedy and the Kasdans. Lawrence Kasdan was one of George Lucas's writers. He wrote Empire, Return of the Jedi, and the Indiana Joneses. The father has some writing potential, but as this just stated, Jonathan was writing the Solo script. I mean, who the fuck is this guy? You're the son of a good writer. You're not Aaron Sorkin by any means. So why were you so pedantic about him shooting everything word for word, unless you're trying to push or force an agenda onto the audience? I mean, most good directors let the actors just go for it and improv things if they feel in the scene or in the moment that something works better than what is written, or hey, can they take the script to new heights by adding something or maybe even leaving something out? After all, I mean, you look at Christopher Nolan let Heath Ledger do pretty much what he liked with the Joker character, and he's one of the most memorable bad guys in cinema history. Half of what Heath Ledger put on into the performance of the Joker wasn't scripted. It was improv. He felt it, he went with it. That's essentially what you let a good actor do, and a good director will acknowledge that and go with it. The writer shouldn't be calling the shots. That's the director's job. So why didn't Kathleen Kennedy just save herself the trouble and just hire Jonathan Kasdan to write and direct the whole film if he's going to be so pedantic about it? Getting back to the article, it was reported that Ron Howard, who had previously collaborated with Lucas as an actor in American Graffiti and the director of Willow, was a frontrunner to step in as director. Howard had turned down an offer to direct Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. Joe Johnston and Kasdan were also considered, though Directors Guild of America rules state that a replacement for a director may not be someone already involved in the production. 2 days later, it was announced that Howard would take over directing for the remaining 3.5 weeks of scheduled principal photography, as well as the scheduled 5 weeks of reshoots. Howard wrote, "I'm beyond grateful to add my voice to the Star Wars universe. I hope to honour the great work already done and help deliver on the promise of a Han Solo film." Howard was expected to arrive in London on June 26 to complete filming. During the reshoots, actor Michael K. Williams was unable to return to the production due to a scheduled conflict with filming the Red Sea diving resort, resulting in his part being cut. Williams stated the reshoots were to match the new direction which the producers wanted Ron to carry the film in, and that he would not have been available again until November 2017. The production did not wait for his availability to make a release in May 2018. Lucas, Howard's friend, mentor and collaborator, made a surprise visit to the set to encourage Howard on his first day shooting. Intended as a short meeting, Lucas spent the whole day with the crew. While Lucas had not meant to interfere, at some point he forgot and asked, "Why doesn't Han just do this?" Howard included his suggestion. On October 17, 2017, Howard announced that principal photography had been completed and revealed the title of the film. Howard used reprojection visual effects for the Millennium Falcon cockpit scenes, an updated version of a technique used in the original trilogy. In March 2018, after it was reported Howard had reshot around 70% of the film, it was announced that Lord and Miller would not challenge for a director credit and instead agreed to an executive producer credit. The duo saw an early cut of Howard's film and provided him with their feedback. Post-production wrapped on April 22nd, 2018. So there you go. Why did Solo fail? Put simply, it was due to Kathleen Kennedy being a bad producer. Where was she at the varying stages of production? She didn't seem to catch any of the problems or differences in creativity at the start, middle, or end of production. If there was a problem with Phil and Lord's style of shooting or how they were doing things, this should have been brought up at the start of production or even before production began. This relates to something I said in the last podcast about The Last Jedi, where I was a script supervisor. Who was supervising not only the script but the director. She seems to pick directors who don't have a lot of experience, with JJ being the exception. Is this so she can control them, so she can force ideologies onto them, and when someone pushes back like a Gareth Edwards or Lord and Miller, huge problems arise and reshoots and budgeting problems start to get out of control. I mean, this is the way I'm seeing it. Rian Johnson pushed her and Disney's agenda, got free reign for The Last Jedi. He was a little yes man who bent over and let Kathleen put the strap on and go to town on him. He pushes her agenda. He gets his so-called Star Wars trilogy where he has free reign to do whatever he likes, which looks like it's not going to happen. Whether he intentionally or inadvertently just destroyed Star Wars in the process as a result of him basically being a yes man for Kathleen. So he gets his trilogy. He gets promised a trilogy if he goes along with it and pushes Kathleen Kennedy and probably Disney's agenda. But if he pushes this agenda, he gets a reward, like a good little lapdog he is. Directors who challenge Kathleen Kennedy's quote-unquote vision for the new generation of Star Wars, or push back or have their own ideas, they're fired. Gareth Edwards has been fired, Lord and Miller have been fired, and Colin Trevorrow have been fired. He was supposed to direct Rise of Skywalker but was fired way before there was even a script, because she didn't like his version of the story. So why doesn't she get along with directors? I mean, you're a producer, you produce a film, you pay the bills, you sign the checks, you make sure everyone's happy, everything's going smoothly. If you want creative control over what these directors do, why don't you become a fucking director? If you're so good at it, you direct all the next Star Wars films, rather than just getting other people to do it, then criticizing their version of things because you don't like it. So I found this interesting article on slashfilm.com. Solo firing explained why Lucasfilm replaced Lord and Miller with Ron Howard. This is posted on Friday, February 9th, 2018, and it's by Chris Evangelista. Pretty sure I butchered your name. So Solo, a Star Wars story, has had a bumpy road to the big screen. The film was close to completion under directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller. Then Lucasfilm fired the duo and brought in Ron Howard. to both finish and reshoot a large portion of the film. A new piece details the process behind the solo firing of Lord and Miller and the hiring of Howard. The ever-expanding Star Wars franchise made headlines when Lucasfilm gave solo directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller the axe after months of filming. Rumours abound that the 21 Jump Street directors had clashed with Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy. Reports also stated Lord and Miller were stunned to find that they were not being granted freedom to run the production in the manner that they were accustomed to. Now a detailed piece from Entertainment Weekly breaks down and explains the inside story behind Lord and Miller being fired and Ron Howard being brought on to finish the film. Lord and Miller. I think both Chris and Phil are enormously talented and incredibly funny, Kathleen Kennedy tells Entertainment Weekly, but apparently they weren't talented or funny enough to deliver the type of Han Solo film Lucasfilm was looking for. Per the EW piece, Lord and Miller took an experimental approach to Solo, a Star Wars story. The filmmakers were open to improvisation. Improvisation isn't discouraged in the Star Wars franchise, yet Lord and Miller's approach were allegedly slowing things down. Kathleen Kennedy explains, quote, I think these guys are hilarious, but they come from the background of animation and sketch comedy. And when you are making these movies, you can do that, and there's plenty of room for improvisation. We do that all the time, but it has to be inside of a highly structured process, or you can't get the work done, and you can't move the armies of people to anticipate and have things ready. So it literally comes down to process, just getting it done, unquote. This squares with the statement Lord and Miller released after they left production. Unfortunately, our vision and process weren't aligned with our partners on this project. We normally aren't fans of this phase creative differences, in quotes, but for once this cliche is true. We are really proud of the amazing and world-class work of our cast and crew. I think everybody went in with really good intentions, and our approach to making the movie was different than theirs. Lord said later via Vulture, that was a really big gap to bridge, and it provided to be too big. Sometimes people break up, and it's really sad, and it's really disappointing. But it happens, and we learned a lot from our collaborators, and we're better filmmakers for it. Lucasfilm announced Ron Howard would take over Solo 2 days after the news of Lord and Miller's film firing broke. Howard isn't the most inspired choice, but he's a pro who knows how to get a film done on time. The director told Entertainment Weekly he was slightly hesitant about taking the gig, not wanting to step on Lord and Miller's toes. I know Chris and Phil, they're incredibly talented guys, but when I learned that this change was happening, it just came in a moment where I was working on lots of new projects for Imagine, and I had not planned to direct anything that last year. So then this came my way. I was reluctant, but I also began to feel that I could help. Howard is a big Star Wars fan, but ultimately the job was too good to pass up. So how much of the final film is Howard's and how much belongs to Lord and Miller? Opinions differ. Co-stars Thandane Newton said Lord and Miller's work is everywhere in it. 90% of my stuff is with them, and it certainly wasn't about, oh, we have to start again and do it all over. Meanwhile, Newton's co-star Paul Bentley claims that Howard reshot a lot more than was originally intended. We may never know the true answer. Howard deliberately dances around the issue in the EW piece. I don't really want to explain it. I don't really want to be specific about that because, again, I don't even want that to matter to fans. I could understand why you'd ask, and some even might be curious, but look, everybody who has been involved in this has done nothing but love what this movie could be, and that's been the vibe around it. I think audiences are going to feel that love and excitement. Howard does add, Phil and Chris's fingerprints are all over the movie. Given how much they put into it and the time they put into it, I hope fans won't even think about how the movie was made. They should just lose themselves in it. That might have been true if it was better. Even if most of the final Footage of Solo was shot by Howard. We had a little help from a very familiar Star Wars face, George Lucas. Per EW, Lucas visited Howard's set and offered advice on a scene. George Lucas had intended to just kind of stop by and say hi, and he stayed 5 hours. Kennedy tells EW, "There's even one little moment in a scene that I can't tell you what, sorry, but in the scene on the Millennium Falcon where George said, 'Why doesn't Han just do this?' Ron happened to be by the monitor and not inside the Falcon, and he goes, 'Oh, that's a great idea,' and ran and said, 'George Lucas wants us to do this.'" Solo, a Star Wars story, opens on May 25th, 2018. Quick little recap of that last part. I can't tell you what, sorry. But in the scene on the Millennium Falcon where George said, "Why didn't Han just do that?" Ron happened to be by his monitor and not inside the Falcon. "Oh, that's a great idea." Well, you just told us the fucking scene that you apparently couldn't tell us. This is why, another example of why I hate Kathleen Kennedy. So this brings us to Lucasfilm and the problems that have plagued the once great production company. In my opinion, this all started when Kathleen Kennedy hired SJW lunatics to head up a once great independent film company, which was once run by artists and people who actually liked the Star Wars films. It's been well documented that Kathleen Kennedy is a feminazi. One example is the photo at Skywalker Ranch with all female employees. She has said she wants to hire as many women as actors, writers, producers, and directors. If you want to be a feminist, go right a fucking head. That's your prerogative, go for it. Star Wars is no place for feminist propaganda. When you have the president of Lucasfilm turning up at conventions and staging photo shoots and going out in public saying, "We need more females in Star Wars, we need less of this, we need more diversity," then you're kind of pushing an agenda. Women have always been in Star Wars, as they have always been in films. Yeah, some films have been more male dominated. There's a lot of people in high who run Hollywood that are men, but this is an example of a woman running Hollywood. And what has she done with that power? She's used that power to push an agenda into a beloved film franchise. There's never a problem to begin with, not within the Star Wars world at least, and yet you've chosen to just bombard the Star Wars going audience with this fucking bullshit feminist ideology that you think Star Wars needs to be more diverse. If you're not making a political point, then what are you trying to do? You're trying to sabotage Star Wars? Are you actually a feminist and you're trying to get your message across? Then if you are using Star Wars and Lucasfilm and your position of power as a soapbox to spread your feminist agenda, you need to be removed from your position as president of Lucasfilm. She's using this power in the company to push this agenda and to subvert the course of the art you're trying to make. So let's look at this on the other hand for a sec. If a man were to do this, say the president of Lucasfilm is a man, or the president of any film company, any type of a bank or an industry, anything like that. So if this man hired / favoured only men for positions within that company or studio, whatever it is, so he only went to hire male actors, writers, directors and producers, you'd be calling him a sexist. You're saying, oh, this guy needs to be removed from power, he's exploiting his position of power, he's favouring only men in an industry dominated by men. This guy's evil, he's excluding women, he's excluding minorities, he's only favouring men who are like him in positions of power. Yet Kathleen Kennedy is a woman, she's also a white woman, in a position of power, who's favouring women over men or minorities or anyone else for jobs within the company she's the president of. How is that not sexist as fuck? She's turned up to events with women with t-shirts saying the force is female. She's turned up at conventions and said, how many girl gamers are out there? Well, the lead of the new video game is a female character. How is that not using your position of power and using Star Wars to push an agenda or an ideology? You'd be pretty quick to point out if a man was doing this, but somehow this is acceptable when the shoe is on the other foot. Kathleen seems to get away with this, and no one says anything. She has a little fuckboy Ryan Johnson ruin things. She hires people who are sympathetic to her cause, such as her little fuckboy Ryan Johnson, who she hired to destroy Star Wars. On the pretense if he did destroy Star Wars, he'd get a reward, the dog gets a bone, and he gets his own trilogy. Didn't work out too well for you, did it, Ryan? Fuck yourself. Both of you. You unbearable, self-righteous fucking cunts. So, whatever happened to, let's just hire the right person for the job, regardless of age, sex, beliefs, nationality, religion or creed. She believes in this point of view so wholeheartedly that she is yet to hire a female director or writer. Instead, she settles for writers and directors who will push her agendas. How about you try coming up with some original characters who aren't cliche stereotypes, such as Rey or Kira or any of the other forgettable characters in the Disney Star Wars sequels. If anything, she has only demonstrated how not to run a company. And how do you run a financial juggernaut and bulletproof franchise like Star Wars into the ground in 3 years? Well, there's 6 steps to destroying a bulletproof business and or brand like Star Wars. Step 1 is to hire morons who hate Star Wars. Step 2, make shit products like movies and toys and expect fans to buy it, regardless of whether the quality of the product is the same as the quality of the product that your customer base is used to buying. Step 3, disrespect the original and majority of loyal fans who spend the most money and make up a majority of your business revenue. Step 4, argue with fans when they tell you there is a problem with your products and or business. Step 5, deny there is a problem and continue to keep your head in the sand. Step 6, go back on your word and betray the man whose visions started it all and who you promised to protect. They're the 6 steps of failure. Not much different to how most businesses are run these days. Just look at the backlash Facebook, YouTube, Google, places like this have become with their customer base and their content producers. There's just no respect with these companies anymore. It's all politics and profit. On a final note, when it comes to Kathleen Kennedy, you have to wonder if this woman was really ever good at her job. She's labelled the most powerful woman in Hollywood. She's produced a lot of Steven Spielberg movies, but at the same time you have to wonder, was her husband really picking up the bill? Because they produced a lot of their films together. But what did she do? Is she nothing more than just a glorified coffee girl? Or basically just Steven Spielberg's assistant? Are Spielberg's earlier films like Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, E.T., etc., or the films that Spielberg worked on where she produced, were they successful because of her or because of him and his stories and the way he chose to direct? You know, a couple of years ago I would have said she was probably one of the best producers in Hollywood. She seems to be able to know how to produce a film when she's not pushing political agendas. The Star Wars sequels could have been really special if she hadn't have gone back on her word. If she had have chose to honour and protect George Lucas's vision, I wouldn't be recording this. If she had have produced Star Wars like she did Spielberg's films, none of this would have ever happened. But instead, this is just another Hollywood personality who's in a position of power, who thinks there's this massive problem with the status quo of society, and gets on the soapbox and preaches to everybody else because their moral compass is so much more attuned than everyone else's. And this is the same industry that lets people like Harvey Weinstein go under the radar for decades. This is the same environment that spawned Me Too, and that's burned out as fast as it began because, once again, the people running it were so high and mighty and so self-fucking righteous, like that Asia Argento, one of the founders of the Me Too movement, that they must have forgotten to tell everyone that she seduced an underage boy. Yet you're so quick to point the finger at people like Harvey Weinstein for exploiting their positions of power when you have done exactly the same thing, except it involved a minor, and I think that's a little worse than some third-rate actress who banged Harvey Weinstein. So, Solo: A Star Wars Story. Yeah, this film, it's not great, it's not bad, it's perfectly in the middle. The best way I can sum it up is it's like a frozen pizza. When you're really, really hungry and it's just come out of the oven, yeah, it hits the spot, it's good. It fills you up, but it's nothing special, didn't particularly taste that great. For the amount of effort and trouble and money that has gone into producing Solo, a Star Wars story, the end result should have been a lot better. Given also that this is one of the most expensive films ever made because they have essentially made the film twice. The original directors were fired with about 3 weeks of principal photography left. Ron Howard was brought in to finish the film and reshoot 70% of it, therefore causing the budget to basically explode. I'm not quite sure what the figures are. I don't think Disney's making that very public, but it was a lot of fucking money. So Disney claimed that the budget for Solo was $275 million. Yes, this is a lot of money even for a Star Wars film, given that, you know, this is probably one of the least visual effects heavy Star Wars films. So $275 million is a lot of money. $230 million is probably where you would want to be. $250, probably no more for a big budget blockbuster like Solo. However, I really think that figure is probably watered down. I don't think Disney really want to make it public how much they actually spent on it, given that it just made back its production costs. So $275 million, I take that with a grain of salt. It's probably more like $310 million, but we have to go by the figures that are available to us. So getting back to the film starts off on Corellia. We see a young Han Solo. Basically, the film chronicles Han Solo's younger years. This is a film that not really many hardcore fans really needed or wanted. Han is a majority of fans' favourite character. I think there's a trend in Hollywood where we have to have a prequel and a backstory for everything now. In October we have the Joker film coming out, and do we really need a backstory to the Joker? Because I think Heath Ledger pretty accurately proved that the less you know about a character, the scarier they are. That's why the xenomorph in Alien was so scary. You don't know where it came from. Ridley Scott tried to do a backstory for it and completely fucked up the whole timeline and the story. But it's a topic for another day. So, yes, there are some good parts of Solo. Corellia was cool. It's an industrial planet. One thing that was really annoying was when he goes to join the Imperial fleet, he signs up to be a pilot under the name Han, and the officer on duty assigns him the surname of Solo. I think this is pretty underwhelming, to say the least. I think the Solo name should have had a little more meaning rather than just, oh, you don't have a surname, let's just call you Han Solo. On the other hand, it is funny, but this is a beloved character that they've already disrespected enough, and now they're just kind of doing it again. Also in this scene, you hear the Imperial March playing on a advertising video for the Imperial Army. That kind of takes you out of Star Wars, because that's a Star Wars thing, not music you would use in a advertisement video. That was a little weird. Then we find Han on a mud planet where he meets Chewbacca. I was always under the impression that Chewbacca and Han met on Kashyyyk during Han's time in the Imperial Army, in the Imperial Navy. But he's just a mud-covered Wookiee in a pit, and somehow Han can speak Wookiee. The Mud Trooper scene was actually pretty cool. We're introduced to Woody Harrelson and co. This is kind of cool. The Mud Troopers did look good, but at the same time we never see who they were really fighting. There's this war going on in the Outer Rim, but never really get a good look at who the enemy are. This is by far one of the most interesting parts of the start of the film. The character of Kira is pretty dry and wooden. Emilia Clarke is pretty boring and wooden. Outside of Game of Thrones, I don't think I've ever seen a film of hers I've actually liked. She's very wooden. She's very boring. I don't think she's a great actress, or actor if you want to be politically correct. You can disagree with me on that all you like, but yeah, it's my show. The scenes with Han and Chewie messing around and when they first working together are actually pretty cool. The scene on the train is cool with those two. Han helps Chewie, Chewie helps Han. Unfortunately, the train scene is pretty cliche. One of the characters is taken out. Han gets his blast the night before, which is a hand-me-down from Tobias Beckett, played by Woody Harrelson. Once again, that's not a huge thing. It's kind of cool, but a weapon like that, it should have had a bit more meaning to it. This train has a lot of valuable coaxium on it, and they have 3 stormtroopers to guard it. A little stupid, but whatever. Once again, the stormtroopers are in this new Polar Troopers or whatever they're called. Just another stormtrooper to sell toys. So, nothing really much happens until we meet Lando, who's played brilliantly by Donald Glover. I think he really hit the nail on the head. He was very good. He channeled Billy D. Williams, the His clothing was really cool. The new Falcon is, it's okay. It's not the way I would have gone, but it's alright. Once again, probably just a marketing tool. It is cool. It was cool to see the Falcon that brand new rather than covered in dirt and beat to shit. One thing I didn't like is Lando's costumes. He has the Jabba's Palace Guard outfit. It does play a part in the film later on, but at the same time, it would have made a hell of a lot more sense if he had got this outfit when he was working with Jabba. It doesn't make a lot of sense that he has it so early on, given that all of his other clothes are pretty flamboyant and elaborate. Yeah, the Spice Mine scene's okay. Chewbacca helping the Wookiees and going off with them is pretty cool. There's a very annoying SJW themed droid who is standing up for droid rights that is unbearable. Best part of the film is when she gets blown apart, and she is somehow inserted into the navicomputer of the Falcon. They cleverly made this character as part of the backdrop of the Falcon. You see it behind Han, this little magnifying glass thing in the cockpit of the Falcon. Yeah, this film's okay. It doesn't really push Star Wars more. There's a lot of SJW and feminist rhetoric throughout it. The Kessel Run is very overdone. I think it was pretty unnecessary to have a giant floating space octopus. It was pretty over the top. It should have been something more dangerous, like an asteroid belt or something like that. That also would have made more sense to how Han can navigate asteroids like the ones in A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. An Imperial fleet follows the Falcon to the Kessel Run. We see a couple of Star Destroyers and a couple of new TIE fighters, but we don't get much more of a look than that. It would have been cool to see more Han training as a pilot in the Imperial Navy. What this film really lacked was stormtroopers. More stormtrooper patrols, more Imperial troops around, more scenes with some Star Destroyers, TIE fighters, what have you. But on the other hand, they wanted to go their own way and do a westerny thing, but I think that was a pretty important part of Han's early years. His costume's kind of cool. However, one of the biggest letdowns of Solo are the villains. There's no real villain in it. Paul Bettany plays Dryden Voss, a scarred up gangster. In his yacht you see a Mandalorian set of armor and all these artifacts. Yeah, it's kind of cool. At the same time, he is not given enough screen time or enough presence to really make an impact. There's a boss showdown at the end of it where Han tries to double cross him and he ends up getting double crossed by Beckett. That was a cool part of the film, as you kind of get why Han is like Han. He doesn't trust anybody. He's been hanging out with a gang of outlaws who are always betraying each other and double crossing each other, which explains why he's so hard to trust new people, and which ultimately put him on the path we come to in the original trilogy, being a smuggler and going out and making deals and stuff. And so yeah, the smuggling part was cool. I did like that. But when it comes to face off the bad guy, it's Kira who ends up taking him out, because 5-foot Amelia Clark couldn't really take out the 6'3" Paul Bettany. But she's a master swordsman, because that part of the story is filled in, that she had the training when Han and her go their separate ways at the start of the film. The other problem is Enfys Nest. Enfys Nest is, once again, pops up every once in a while, isn't a huge threat. You're kind of thinking, is this a Boba Fett-esque kind of character? Boba Fett would have been a nice addition to the film, but I'm guessing they were planning on making a trilogy of these films, which obviously that hasn't panned out. I would have liked to see Jabba and Boba Fett in it, but that's neither here nor there. Enfys Nest, you're kind of thinking, is this character a Mandalorian? It's revealed at the end of it, she's a red-headed, spotty-faced teenage girl. What a shocker. That would have been a nice twist if we hadn't already seen this huge female push from Disney and Lucasfilm. Once again, I mean, if the character was done right, yeah, this would have worked, but she only pops up every once in a while. She never is really a threat. And there's this kind of a Mexican standoff towards the end of the film, and ultimately they team up and end up working together and double-crossing Dryden Voss, who Beckett double-crosses Han's triple-crossed Beckett and Voss, and comes out on top. At the end, he has to make a choice, and he kills Beckett. This is kind of cool because he doesn't want to. This is his first mentor, and he pretty much has to shoot him. He tells him, "Do not trust me, kid," and yeah, that's how it plays out. So there's a couple really good little nods to the original trilogy and to who Han becomes. Alden Ehrenreich was pretty good as Han. I was very skeptical because I'm a Harrison Ford fan. This is very big shoes to fill. He's no Harrison Ford, but he does do a pretty good job. Apparently there was a lot of problems with trying to get him to act and talk like Harrison Ford. He wasn't very confident as an actor and needed a lot of lessons or something, but whatever. We all have our obstacles. So the film concludes with Kira and Han going their separate ways. She is contacted by none other than Darth Maul. This is cool. This is a little tie-in to the Clone Wars and Rebels. Darth Maul wasn't killed in Episode 1. He survives being cut in half by Obi-Wan, and the Sith anger keeps him alive in the Naboo generator pit thing. He apparently scrounges some supplies and makes himself some legs, and so Darth Maul, in his absence, has formed a criminal empire. He's now the leader of the shadowy criminal organisation called Crimson Dawn. Crimson Dawn is mentioned in The Force Awakens and is one of the groups that pays Han a visit during the Rathtar escape. So this is very cool. This is very surprising. I kind of didn't see it coming, but it was a very nice surprise at the end of the film, seeing Darth Maul back. It would be really cool if they did continue the Solo spin-offs, because it'd be really cool if they could combine, Boba Fett, Darth Maul, Jabba, Han, Lando, and put Obi-Wan in there. It's really cool to see Darth Maul back. I've always liked Darth Maul. However, it's too little too late. Solo ends just as it starts to get really interesting. So the problem with Solo is the best parts of it are glossed over so quickly and replaced with a lot of filler. Yeah, there's some cool scenes with Han flying and walking around the Falcon and stuff like that. Some little nostalgic twists. George Lucas even participated in a scene. He gave some direction to Ron Howard. Well, Han should do this on one of his set tours, which was included in the film. But however, we needed more Wookiees, we needed more Mud Troopers, we needed more Imperial Fleet, we needed more Darth Maul, and a Mandalorian or two wouldn't have gone astray. Solo isn't good, it isn't bad, it's perfectly average. For the amount of effort, time and money that's gone into Solo, it should have been brilliant. The production was plagued with a lot of problems. However, there's been some truly great films that have had very plagued productions. I mean, Titanic had its fair share of drama, and look how it turned out. So that isn't an excuse as to why Solo failed. Solo failed because Kathleen Kennedy and Disney didn't listen to fans. They forced upon the fans a film they didn't ask for. They didn't bring anything new to the table. They didn't bring anything new to the mythology. They've only managed to misconstrue and dilute Han's mythology. This would have been a great opportunity to see Kashyyyk again, to see more Wookiees, to see Han training in the Imperial Navy. But no, the stories we thought we knew about Han were ultimately proved that they were wrong. These were all expanded universe stories that have ultimately been classed as legends and not Star Wars canon. The failings of Solo are down to a few things. Disney and Kathleen Kennedy not listening to fans, Disney forcing a film onto fans that they didn't ask for, but ultimately Solo failed because of The Last Jedi. Fans organised a boycott of Solo as protest for The Last Jedi, which I've outlined enough, I think, in my last podcast. If you haven't heard it, make sure you go back and give it a listen. Kathleen Kennedy claims that the failings of Solo are due to Star Wars fatigue. I think this is bullshit. Most Star Wars fans want as much Star Wars as they can get. The other problem with Solo is that it was released not even 6 months after The Last Jedi. And with the scars of The Last Jedi fresh in fans' minds, how did they ever expect that this film was going to work out? It should have been released around Christmas time like every other Star Wars film has, and maybe the box office revenue would have been better. But I know Kathleen Kennedy and Disney know better than the bottom-end consumer of Star Wars products. Lucasfilm and Disney employees like to claim that Star Wars fans are not customers of their products. They like to say, well, you don't have any real stake in these companies. You're going to the theatre and you're watching the movie, but that's all. Well, no, we are actually paying for products. These people pay for toys, which aren't selling. They pay for a lot of Star Wars merchandise outside of the Star Wars films. These people are loyal customers to your brand, and the brand is telling them that no, you're not customers. There's nothing wrong with our products, there's something wrong with you. This is Star Wars fatigue, this is man babies, these are toxic Star Wars fans. Yeah, not likely. It's more likely that your products are wrong and the bottom end consumer is not going to pay for them. Okay, moving along. Okay, so now we come to the deplorables. Beta shell employees at Lucasfilm. There are good guys and bad guys working at Lucasfilm. There are 27 leadership positions at Lucasfilm, starting with the Queen Bitch, Kathleen Kennedy. Out of those 27 employees who work at Lucasfilm HQ, 14 of them were hired after the sale of Lucasfilm in 2012. The other 13 have been with Lucasfilm for most of their careers, or have worked at ILM or Lucasfilm Games or animation, etc. I checked out the website, and one thing that stuck out, nearly all of the post-2012 employees are at the top of the website, right under Kathleen Kennedy. Most of the Lucasfilm vets can be found at the bottom of the page. Pretty funny about that. In my opinion, KK has chosen yes men to serve under her, and not the people who should be in these positions. After reading through some of the bios of these employees, the veteran Lucasfilm employees have huge amounts of experience and passion for the chosen fields. They have spent a good portion of their lives working in the industry and for Lucasfilm. They clearly love what they do. On the other hand, Kathleen Kennedy's chosen few look like they're straight out of diversity school or went to the approved SJW colleges. The newbies' bios read like a resume that's completely devoid of any passion or much experience. There clearly is an unfair bias to those who are willing to go along with Kathleen Kennedy's plans. If you truly wanted to run a company to the best of one's abilities, you would hire the best people in their fields, and not based on political or social opinions. I mean, that is the best way to ruin a company's image, by hiring people who care more about political correctness, politics or social justice, rather than employees who care about the core customer fans and the art forms that they've dedicated their lives and careers in trying to better. In recent years, Lucasfilm employees have openly engaged in Twitter and social media arguments with true Star Wars fans. One example of this is the director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson loves to engage in arguments with fans on social media. I guess no one told him how to conduct himself as a professional adult. He loves to get engaged in Twitter battles. He has said things like, "I am Rian Johnson, the fucking director and writer of The Last Jedi." He has argued back and forth with fans on Twitter. Rather than admit he made a bad movie, or maybe that his movie was flawed in some way, and act like a mature adult, he resorts to childish name-calling of fans. Some of his best insults are, "You don't understand The Last Jedi." Well, Ryan, if you go to a movie, the movie should explain itself. You shouldn't need supplemental material like a lot of defenders of The Last Jedi claim. You need to read the book, or you need to read this set of novels or this set of comics to understand it properly. The movie should explain itself pretty sufficiently in the time frame that it has. If the movie doesn't explain itself well and you have to go to outside forms of media that are outside of the film to get an explanation of what was going on in the film, then you failed as a director and a writer. I mean, I don't hear James Cameron making these type of arguments for why people didn't like Titanic. A lot of people loved it, a lot of people hated it. He doesn't go, "Oh, well, you have to understand the historical research and you have to watch this amount of many documentaries in order to understand it properly." As a professional, you take it on the chin, you move on. You don't act like a 14-year-old who's got hurt feelings in a playground. Some of Rian Johnson's greatest hits also include "You're all a bunch of man babies." This refers to Star Wars fans that he feels are nerdish and take Star Wars way too seriously. Fair enough. I mean, these people's lives are Star Wars, and you have disrespected that love. Of course they're going to be angry at you. I mean, it's not rocket science. You made a shit fucking film that a majority of hardcore Star Wars fans don't like, and you can't understand why they're angry. Or maybe you can, and you're so narcissistic that you don't care, and you'd like to egg these people on. Either way, you're a fucking punk. So, I've just brought up Rian Johnson on Twitter. These are some of his other tweets. And just to be totally clear, this is not about fans liking or not liking the movie. I've had tons of great talks with great fans online and off who liked and disliked stuff. That's what fandom is all about. This is specifically about a virulent strain of online harassment. I wonder who started that line of harassment. You've been pretty good at it yourself. You've been pretty good at harassing fans and non-fans on Twitter. But on the other hand, you don't like it when someone harasses you. He's also gone one step further and blamed Russian bots and trolls for most of the negative press that The Last Jedi has received. Really, this has really affected like Rotten Tomato scores and ratings of your film. Maybe people just don't like it, Ryan. Even if you took all those bots and trolls into account, still doesn't account for a huge percentage of people who didn't like your fucking film. He's also got a tweet from the 1st of October 2018. A bit of Morton's research came out a while ago and made some headlines. Here's his full paper, looking forward to reading it. But what the top line describes is consistent with my experience online. Yeah, if you weren't such a cunt, you wouldn't attract so much negativity. The negative attracts negativity. Here's my final draft on the politicalization of Star Wars fandom in The Last Jedi, accepted for publication. First mate says 50% of criticism directed at Rian Johnson was political trolling. He's trying to liken himself to Trump and that this is all politically motivated. He's also gone back and forth with many fans, arguing with them. He loves the man babies comment. It's a lot of immature name calling, and he has the balls to call out other people for online harassment and that his online experience has been negative. Well, yeah, as I just said, the negative attracts negativity. Does this sound like the conduct of a professional filmmaker or a fucking shill Lucasfilm employee? He has even bullied YouTubers over their content. This guy's a total fucking cunt. He is unprofessional, childish, and petty. The YouTuber mentioned is a guy called Mike Zeroth. He does Star Wars news, I think weekly. His show money revolves on putting out rumors that are going to happen in future films, such as, there's a news of a new villain or whatever. So Ryan, I thought that this was funny that started calling things that happened on the set a Zeroth, or we Zeroth that up as a derogatory insult, basically saying that this was garbage content or whatever. I can't remember the exact reasoning why he went after this guy, but it was something to do with, he put out a rumor about The Force Awakens, and I think it was a theory about Snoke, and then he replied on Twitter with this your fan, Snoke theory sucks, or whatever, and he said that was wrong, and then he went after, not so much went after this guy, but started taking the piss out of him for presenting a rumor. I mean, half the shit you see on YouTube isn't factual or real in any way, shape, or form, so it's a very petty thing to do, going after a guy who has a YouTube channel. I mean, you're making fucking Star Wars, for fuck's sake. Be humble, show some humility. You've been given a great honor, and you fucked it up. You've pissed in the fans' face, and you're trying to deny you've done any wrong. You go after people who talk out about it, who said negative things about it. This guy's a fucking cunt. Now, on the other hand, we have the conduct of a professional filmmaker, Zack Snyder. He's made Watchmen, 300, Batman vs Superman, and Justice League. He got a lot of fan backlash over Batman vs Superman, and he took it in his stride. He replied, "I'm very sorry you feel like that. This is just my version of Batman and Superman in DC world. I don't expect everyone to like it. This is just how I envision things." A lot of fans were upset the way he chose to go with his version of the DC universe. He took it on the chin, he apologised for it, he moved on. He has chosen to rock the boat. He cared more about getting back at Twitter haters than deal with the fallout he and Kathleen Kennedy had created. He was even promised his own trilogy where he would have free reign over everything, much as he did with The Last Jedi. This must have been his price for destroying the Star Wars universe. His trilogy is supposed to start filming this year, but it looks like it has been cancelled He did a good job of gloating about it on social media. So Kathleen Kennedy didn't have a problem with Ryan's film while it was in production. Every other Star Wars film, there has been a problem with the creative department, namely the director. Gareth Edwards was replaced due to his disagreement about the end of Rogue One. Second assistant director Tony Gilroy had to reshoot the ending of the film. It was too gritty, it was too dark for a Star Wars film. But that's what made Rogue One great, is it was outside the box, it was darker, it was a more adult look at Star Wars. Chris Miller and Phil Lord were replaced on Solo over creative differences. As I've said above, they wanted to go a very different way to KK. Colin Trevorrow was fired before he even got to make Episode 9. He had a disagreement over the creative direction Kathleen Kennedy wanted to go. Even J.J. Abrams has had problems with her, although these have not been elaborated on. Kathleen Kennedy is a fucking producer. You pay the bills, organise shit and sign the checks at the end of the day, and take most of the credit when the film is finished. She is not a creative head. She is the president of Lucasfilm. If anything, Dave Filoni should be the creative head of all of Lucasfilm's Star Wars related projects. He's demonstrated his handling and love for Star Wars. Dave Filoni was handpicked by George Lucas himself to oversee the Clone Wars and Rebels TV series. No surprise that Kathleen Kennedy cancelled Clone Wars mid-season when she became president. So I found it pretty funny and a little poetic when they decided to bring back the Clone Wars for a final season. A final season that it should have got a long time ago. This was a stupid decision in the first place. It looks like it was done just as a show of control over the company on Kennedy's part. She was probably not happy with Dave Filoni having creative control over an element of Lucasfilm that she wasn't directly controlling, and decided to shut it down. But due to unprecedented fan pressure and dwindling sales in Star Wars products, it's back. So how can a president of a company be so out of touch and piss so many fans off and still claim to be faithful to George Lucas's original vision? That's a very good question. How can a president of a company be so out of touch with its core customer base? Simple. She just doesn't care at all. Kathleen Kennedy is using the Star Wars brand as a weapon for political correctness, diversity and social justice issues. Star Wars has always been diverse. It touched upon big themes such as good versus evil, tyranny, oppression, freedom, and friendship, just to name a few. The new Star Wars resemble nothing of those original values that George Lucas had instilled in the originals and the prequels. Why didn't she keep things as they were? The machine wasn't broken, so why try to fix it, if there wasn't some ulterior motive behind it at all? On the other hand, Disney is also to blame. Bob Iger, the head of Disney, has the power to remove her. Given the disastrous figures Star Wars has done while she has been in power, he would be well within his means to do so. I'd imagine the shareholders would be calling for blood and putting a lot of pressure on him to do something about her. But no, she had a contract extension of 3 years instead of being fired on the spot like anyone else would. To further elaborate on this, I'm going to read an article from Forbes.com by Scott Mendelson, senior contributor, Hollywood and Entertainment. Disney rehires Kathleen Kennedy after acclaimed, successful Star Wars movies. As reported by The Hollywood Reporter on Friday, Walt Disney has renewed the contract of Kathleen Kennedy, meaning the current head of Lucasfilm will remain the head of Lucasfilm for at least the next 3 years. In a rational world, this would be an expected development. Kennedy has produced the Star Wars movies for Walt Disney, which has grossed a total of $4.85 billion worldwide on a combined production budget of around $1 billion, generally speaking. When a producer's first 4 films under a given contract earn an average of $1.2125 billion worldwide, for the company, that producer gets to keep their job if they so choose. Yet, there exists a notion that Star Wars is in peril, or that the producer of E.T., Jurassic Park and The Sixth Sense is not fit to handle Lucasfilm. This is mostly thanks to the online horrumps arguing that Kennedy has ruined Star Wars via The Last Jedi's deconstructive mythology, or schemes to populate Star Wars movies with non-white female heroes. Part of this is due to an online news culture that will prop up any absurd argument as long as it's clickbait. So we're forced to discuss whether the theatre chain holding a No Boys Allowed Wonder Woman screening is a civil rights violation. Pause for a minute. Yeah, isn't that construed as sexism? If I was a theatre chain owner, I would want everybody in my theatre watching films. Because let's face it, people aren't going to the movies as much as they used to, so theatre chain owners should be thankful for the business they were getting, because you can just as easily stay at home and watch the same shit on Netflix, but pay half as much for it and not have to leave your house. Back to it. But try to ignore the online mob. I know that's hard to do when our SEO-driven media automatically brings them to the forefront and inadvertently gives them a seat at the debate table. What we have is a revamped franchise that has shattered box office records and earned mostly positive reviews and viewer feedback. Even if your account of Solo, ironically the new Star Wars movie starring a white guy, is the one that was ignored overseas. The franchise has been a best case scenario of any kind for intellectual property recharge. Nothing else, not Jurassic World, not Mad Max Fury Road, and certainly not Terminator can compare. Let's pause again. People are seeing Star Wars because it's Star Wars. If you didn't have generations of already built-in die-hard fanatical Star Wars fans who would line up around the block for a week just so they can see this first screening of the new installment of Star Wars, buy the toys, books, video games, related media, t-shirts, coffee mugs, who spend millions of dollars a year on Star Wars merchandise. I mean, is it any wonder that these films generate, $2 billion? The Force Awakens was a success because it was Star Wars. It was the first Star Wars since Revenge of the Sith back in 2005. That's why that film was successful. Not because it was a good film, not because it pushed new ideas, not because it had game-changing, new, lovable characters. It was successful because it was Star Wars. It was stamped with the Star Wars brand, it was packaged in the Star Wars packet, and it was sold to Star Wars fans. That doesn't make it a good film. In my opinion, the film was fucking shit. It was regurgitated, nostalgia-driven shit. The characters were fucking hateable and unlikable, as I've said on previous podcasts. The story was basically a retelling of A New Hope. It was nothing exciting. People can hate the prequels as much as they like. The prequels did something different. They pushed the boundaries of technology. They tried to elevate Star Wars to a new and more expansive universe. Who are we as Star Wars fans to argue with George Lucas, the man that created it after all? Is this Kathleen Kennedy being a wonderful fucking producer? Or is this just simply the fact that you had a built-in audience? You already had a customer base who were going to see it regardless. How are people to know that The Force Awakens and Last Jedi were going to be shit films before they went to them? Star Wars fans, even if they knew they were garbage, they still would have seen them anyway, because that's what Star Wars fans do. So to say that they were a critical and financial success is a very jaded, very grey area statement to make. They're good, critically acclaimed films according to who? By Rotten Tomatoes. We know Disney buys fucking reviews. On IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, sites like that. Any wonder that Disney would do the same thing for Star Wars? I mean, they've done this for all their franchises. It's the Disneyfication of the film industry. This is what they fucking do. Mad Max Fury Road is a far better film than Force Awakens, Last Jedi, or Jurassic World. It appeals to a certain audience. It doesn't appeal to a massive Star Wars-sized audience. Jurassic World is the same. There's lots of people that love it, but that movie still made over $1 billion. Terminator is more of a cult following, and looks like they've gone the same way as every other franchise with Terminator Dark Fate. Can't wait for that to fail. So that statement really does piss me off. So fans, this is saying like people do not give credit to the Star Wars fans. They're labelled as overweight, sexist white males that live in their mother's basement playing video games all day. That's just simply not true. You get a very diverse demographic of Star Wars fans telling you they're not happy with the current product or the way the films are going. Like I've said before, there's no surprise that a female was going to be the lead character. That's not the problem. I was kind of hoping that was going to be the case anyway. The problem is the way they handled it. You had a stereotype rather than a hero. And one thing they haven't mentioned is that Star Wars Last Jedi had the highest second week drop-off of any Star Wars film to date. In China, the box office revenue was basically non-existent for The Last Jedi. Chinese audiences were not willing to be lectured on on social or gender politics. And that's why that movie sucked. An audience of billions in China and the film sucked. So what does that tell you? Yeah, in the Western world it might have done okay. It would have done better than independent films. However, something that they don't mention in this is that Jumanji made more money than The Last Jedi. It was the number one film for 4 or 5 weeks in a row, where The Last Jedi was number one for 1 week. So, let's get back to it. All 4 new Star Wars movies earned mostly positive reviews and A or A cinema goer grades. Unlike a number of online user polls, folks who participate in Cinema Score polling actually have to have seen the movie. So what's he saying? People who submit reviews on a movie they haven't seen are deliberately doing that to try and change the scores? Or why would you write a film review on a site like Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb and not have seen the film? The 2 episode movies have the second biggest $248 million and third biggest $220 million opening weekends of all time, behind only Avengers Infinity War, $258 million. Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, has the third biggest December launch, behind only the other 2 Star Wars flicks, a $155 million debut that is 84% larger than The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey, $84 million in 2012. All of the 3 of these flicks posted good to great multipliers. Yeah, once again, Hobbit hasn't had a 40-year head start on building the fan base. Star Wars is a different beast. The Last Jedi had a 2.8 times multiplier for a $620 million domestic total. That's actually a little low for a major Christmas release, but A, most December releases don't open with $220 million, and B, it was still leggier than Avengers Infinity War, which earned $678 million from a $258 million debut. Rogue One pulled off a normal for a December biggie, 3.43 times multiplier for a $532 million cum. Okay, I don't know what that means. While The Force Awakens earned a whopping $937 million from its $248 million launch, a huge 3 times 77 times multiplier. In unadjusted domestic grosses, the first 3 new Star Wars movies are the first, 8th and 11th biggest earners of all time. Worldwide, they are 3rd, 11th and 27th. Once again, is this any surprise given the fanaticism of Star Wars fans? Now, that's not to say Solo wasn't an embarrassing miss, or that folks like me hadn't spent the last 4 years making, like John McClane, frantically waving the fire torches in the air, hoping to prevent the plane from crashing. But the film was actually an in-development project from before Disney brought Lucasfilm and was explicitly greenlit by Bob Iger. That's a share the blame miss. Moreover, the optics alone for Disney firing a female producer after 3 straight female-led $1 billion grosses because the white male-centric spin-off tanked would be beyond ugly, even if they didn't replace her with a dude. That's a very problematic thing to say, Mr. Mendelsohn. The 3 big female-led films did well because they were Star Wars. 2 of them were the sequels. People who have seen the first one were probably going to see the second one, and as you see, there's a massive downturn from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi by nearly $1 billion fucking dollars. Rogue One made $1 billion. At the same time, Solo sucked because of the failings of The Last Jedi. In the eyes of fans, they don't never want to take their fans seriously. They never want to give them any credit or credence for boosting these sales. If you didn't have the fucking fans seeing these films, you wouldn't make half of that revenue. So what they never like to give fans credit for is that fans didn't go see Solo, a Star Wars story. Some of them did. A lot of fans that were pissed off about The Last Jedi didn't see Solo, a Star Wars story. What he also fails to mention is there was a worldwide boycott of Solo, a Star Wars story from hardcore fans. There were people deliberately not seeing it on the first and second weekends to make a point to Disney that they weren't going to get their money. We're going to have to wait and see till December to see if the Rise of Skywalker boycott goes the same way, and if it does, then maybe people like this will start listening to the fans and pay less interest to box office titles or what have you. Kennedy's public squabbles with the directors she hired are the kind of inside baseball gossip that a generation ago wouldn't have been dissected in public. I call bullshit. I wish Kennedy would put her money where her mouth is in terms of hiring more diverse directors and non-white leading ladies. But a skewered irony of what we've seen thus far is that each Star Wars movie released under her tenure has scratched a specific itch while in turn earning the ire of folks who argued that a given release was not my Star Wars. As long as the loudest protesters control the debate, that will never change. Yet, we want to look at the hypocrisy of these film companies in these films. So you get a female lead, then you got guys like this who, we have a white female lead. So on one hand, Kathleen Kennedy tries to be more diverse. You could call her a racist for not hiring a black female lead or a Asian female lead. It's always a white female lead. So you want to be diverse, but you end up being sexist. You try not to be sexist, and you end up ignoring diversity, and vice versa. And this whole clusterfuck of politics in movies goes on and on and on and on. And this is why I have no interest in going to the movies anymore. The new Terminator, it looks like it's going to be fucking shit. They've gone the same way. White female character, and have another female character. The man who made Terminator the Terminator is, we're guessing, going to be a co-star. But then you come down to the villain of the film is played by a Latino male. So Hollywood is awesome at playing diversity and the race card when it suits them, but you still portray Latinos as second-rate citizens and the villains as they're now the default villains in pretty much any action movie that's been made. Hollywood is full of hypocritical cunts, just like every other field is. You're not diverse. You're not supporting any causes. You're just pissing people off and losing money. And now politics is dictating art. Politics is destroying art. It has no place in art. Full stop. Back to it. The Force Awakens was a franchise reset that explicitly attempted to recapture the excitement of the original trilogy. That pisses me off, because it should have been another story that pushed Star Wars to new heights. Not recapture the excitement of the original trilogy. The original trilogy captures the excitement of the original trilogy. That's what makes the original trilogy so fucking special. Nothing can recapture it. And yet these fuckheads at Disney keep playing on nostalgia. The same way they've re-released The Lion King, Aladdin, and every other fucking one of their classic films. Every one of their classic animated films, they're going to turn into live action events and fuck them up. Yes, they are going to make money. Yes, they'll be loved by critics because they're getting a kickback from Disney. But when you look at them as for what they are, they suck donkey balls. So going back to what this fuckboy is saying, to the point where it played like a loose remake of The New Hope. Yes, it was a fucking remake of The New Hope. It just didn't recapture the original trilogy. It butchered everything. It was a fucking disgrace. The Last Jedi was a deep dive, deconstruction, and an attempt to take the mythology in a new, off-the-movement directions. It also ignored most of what had happened in Star Wars up until that point, and pretty much ignored everything that happened in The Force Awakens. Rogue One was a timely war movie that told a straight-up genre story within Star Wars sandbox. Solo was an original trilogy fan bait. It was an old-school heist caper that played like an Indiana Jones movie and felt inspired by the movies that inspired Star Wars, as opposed to being inspired by Star Wars. Yeah, unfortunately, it missed on all accounts. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't dramatic. The action was pretty tame. Nothing we hadn't seen before. It was pretty watered down, and yeah, it was pretty average. All of these Walt Disney releases earned solid reviews and strong polling scores. Most general moviegoers either loved them or thought them fine, I guess, as enjoyable Saturday matinee. Yes, but is that the definition of success? See, you're having these huge box office revenues, but is that how they define success? Well, yeah, obviously it is by the box office revenue, but that doesn't make These films, good. Fine, I guess, is not, wow, they'll be talking about this film in 40 years' time, like the original Star Wars. Each of these films have their fans and their detractors among the vocal fan base. All of them have areas where they excelled and areas where they faltered. But over the last 3 years, we have seen a pattern where a new Star Wars movie has quenched a specific thirst only to face backlash. Because those who didn't want the specific flavour or were just awful people took to the internet and shouted the loudest, "Oh, I used to like this Scott Mendelson guy, now I think he's a fuckhead." Who didn't want a specific flavour or were just awful people. So if I don't like a movie, that makes me an awful person. I didn't like The Last Jedi because it wasn't particularly entertaining, it didn't feel like a Star Wars movie, and it ruined the continuity and characters along the way. Does that make me an awful person, or does that make Rian Johnson a bad writer and director? Leave it up to you. Yes, Star Wars 9 could take a Jurassic Park 3 level tumble and gross $850 million worldwide. Let's hope it does. Or it could rise like Return of the Jedi and Revenge of the Sith and earn $1.7 billion worldwide. I'm guessing the answer is somewhere in between, with the goal arguably being enough $1.15 billion to push Disney's Star Wars franchise over the $6 billion milestone. After that, it may indeed be a tough road for the Star Wars saga, as it will have to justify itself without explicit links to the Skywalker solo saga. I don't envy Kennedy's role in creating a Star Wars saga that isn't connected to Star Wars, Empire or Jedi. Yeah, well, maybe this idiot needs to do his research and find out there's a huge Star Wars expanded universe, Knights of the Old Republic, and that looks like that's going to be the new trilogy. We know and expect fewer Star Wars movies, which is right to maintain their event movie status. We know to expect a TV series and animated shows to fill in the gaps and continue to theoretically strengthen the brand in between movies. But outside of the media circus and clickbait cycle, that which positions a well-reviewed and well-received $1.33 billion grossing sequel as a franchise-killing flop and argues that the producer of that movie should be fired is a no-brainer. To keep the woman who produced the Star Wars movies that have earned $4.8 billion worldwide, keeping Kathleen Kennedy is both convenient and correct. So, think of it this way. With such a low approval by fans, could Disney have paid critics or trolls to act on their behalf? I think this is entirely possible given how ruthless they are in other areas of business. This is the first time such a backlash against a film has been taken to this level. I'm not going to read the rest of this article. It ain't worth my time. If you want to read it, that was Scott. You can find it on Forbes.com by Scott Mendelson. So in recent months, there has been some firings at Lucasfilm, which one must ask, is Lucasfilm or the mouse cleaning house? The most noticeable sacking was none other than Kerry Hart, the former Vice President of Development. Hart was let go January 19, 2019. She was hired in 2012 and helped to form the Lucasfilm Story Group. She is currently listed as a Lucasfilm consultant. Bullshit, you're fired. You don't go from being the next in line for the top job at Lucasfilm to being a consultant. That just doesn't fucking happen. I think it's pretty clear she is long gone by this point. During her time at Lucasfilm, she hired several employees under her with little to no experience in the field. However, they are still working at Lucasfilm. She also hired only women to form the story group. If that isn't a demonstration of corporate feminism, I don't know what is. If you hadn't guessed it by now, Miss Hart is a rampant feminist who employed women only, who saw eye to eye with her own perverted views. And this is why feminism doesn't work, and social justice warriors have no place in the business world or in society in general. So, once again, we have a feminist in a position of power who exploits that power and hires only women for the story group. I mean, just fuck this company at this point. I'm fucking sick of talking about it. Fuck these people, they're all the fucking same. In doing my research for this episode, I found a pretty funny and interesting website called DisneyStarWarsIsDumb.wordpress.com. If you agree with me in the way Star Wars is going, definitely give Disney Star Wars is dumb at wordpress.com a look. So this is an article called Deconstructing the Deconstruction of the Star Wars Franchise. Utter catastrophe looming for Star Wars third wave feminists. I'm beginning to suspect that the story group may dissolve sometime between now and around the release of Episode 9. To understand why, let's take a brief look at the Star Wars group cast of characters. I'll be looking at IMDb entries to look at each other's experience, so keep in mind that IMDb may not list the entirety of a person's credits, and that story group members could have potentially been hired for experience other than movie making. Wow, that'd be a fucking shocker. Kerry Hart, the former leader of the story group, is now working as a consultant. Ryan Roberts, Kerry Beck, both hires of Kerry Hart, which I wrote about here, both had next to no experience being hired. So I just clicked on the link, will Kerry Hart's hire survive? So the two that Kerry Hart hired, just looking at them, you know they're rampant feminists. These two just look like fucking SJW lunatics. These are the type of people that have just ruined video games, comics, movies and TV and pretty much everything else in the world. They just look like entitled, up their own fucking ass millennial cunts. One of the very first things Kerry Hart did when she established a story group and made it exclusively female, once again, how is that not a huge sexist civil rights issue? So it's okay for feminists to do it, but if a man does the same thing, well, he's evil, he's a sexist, he's a racist, he's a whateverist. Was to hire Ryan Roberts and Kerry Beck, according to the New York Times. Kathleen Kennedy founded the group in 2012 when she succeeded George Lucas as president as Lucasfilm, putting Kerry Hart, a former film and TV writer, in charge of the unit. Miss Hart's first move was to make the story group entirely female, starting with Ryan Roberts and Kerry Beck. Both women had experience in film development, but had also worked in other areas. Miss Roberts in magazine publishing and Miss Beck with the Sundown Institute. Here's what one Reddit user looking at the story group members had to say about Ryan and Kerry Beck in July of 2018. I'm seriously speechless learning that Kerry's primary criteria for choosing people to hire for the story group was their gender. Let's take a look next at Kerry Hart's first two hires. Ryan Roberts' IMDb states her experience prior to story group was as an assistant to someone on a movie called Life as We Know It, and as an associate producer for a 2008 documentary called The Fair Trade. That's it, nothing else before joining the Lucasfilm story group. Kerry Beck's experience isn't any better. Her only experience listed on IMDb before joining the story group was an executive producer for a made-to-TV movie in 2010 called Ghost Aliens. That sounds fucking riveting. That's all. Pretty weak experience in film development, as the New York Times article put it. So the inexperienced story group leader, who was quietly moved to a role as a consultant, hired two more inexperienced storytellers. One wonders how long will they last, Twitter user Jar Jar Abrams recently observed. Ryan Roberts deleted all her tweets recently. Jar Jar Abrams at Jar Jar Abrams, February 18, 2019. Curious indeed. Why are they hiring these people? It's not for the quality of their character. It's not because they're brilliant writers or producers or whatever. They're not even hired on the grounds of experience alone. They're hired to push an agenda. And if Kathleen Kennedy is not pushing a fucking agenda or using Star Wars as a soapbox for a said agenda, I don't know what else they're trying to play at. Because, again, this is a blatantly sexist move. If a man did this, you would never hear the fucking end of it. He'd be vilified and dragged through the streets. But I know Kathleen Kennedy and Kerry Hart get away with it. I mean, reading more of this shit makes me want to fucking projectile vomit. So these people have no experience, and you want to hire them as part of the story group for the biggest intellectual property in human fucking history. Why don't you go and hire, I don't know, like fucking Michael Crichton or someone like that? Why don't you go hire someone like Aaron Sorkin for the story group, or writers that have some credibility? It's obviously not an issue with money, because this company's got more money than fucking God. So it's obviously not about, oh, we can only hire people out of college, or we only have a certain salary cap we have to meet. You have all the resources, you can hire anyone on the planet and they will do it. Fuck, you could get people writing for free for Star Wars, but yet you're hiring a very, very, very small demographic, which is all female, to head up the story group. It wasn't just inexperience from Kerry Hart's hires either. I found this out with most of the post-2012 Lucasfilm hires, is that pretty much none of them have any experience in the fields that they've been hired for. I mean, pretty much everyone Kathleen Kennedy has hired is not fit to do that job. The recent number 2 in charge of the company was pretty much J.J. Abrams' coffee girl. She was an assistant on a couple of films, and now she is the vice president in charge of Lucasfilm. I mean, how about Doug Chiang, one of the artists who has been there since the prequel days? I mean, this guy's given 20-something years of his life to Lucasfilm, and yet they have some 30-something-year-old, fresh-faced, out of college, who was an assistant on a couple of films, and who's produced a couple of TV shows, is now the VP. I mean, what happened? Like, you used to have to work your ass off to get qualifications in this world. Now it's, if you're a certain gender or they need a certain diversity quota, that pretty much gets you the job these days. Just look at what the Australian Army has been doing with their ad campaigns. They have a certain quota of women they have to hire. Political correctness and social justice warriors, they fucking ruin the world. Well, also, climate change and global warming, corruption also might have a great deal to do with it, but they've just fucked it. They've fucked all the good things in life up. So Disney Star Wars is dumb at .wordpress.com lists pretty much all the employees that have been hired post 2012 and lists their experience. Shout out to this site. He's done a lot of research. I'm very impressed. If you're interested in what I'm saying, go over, check it out. There's a few more. Diana Williams. Diana had no experience before joining Lucasfilm. What a surprise. Steve Blank had no experience before joining Lucasfilm. He has 5 credits, mostly in TV. Star Wars Rebels. Yeah, and these people are all hired as of the 2012 takeover. James Ward has no IMDb entry. So he's working in the film industry and he's not even on an Internet Movie Database entry. I mean, there's college kids who get on that shit, right? Stephen Feder has no significant experience as a producer, going back to the Jerry Springer Show in 91. Cara Pardo, no experience prior to working at Lucasfilm. Matt Martin is a bit more if a familiar face, but he too has no experience listed before Lucasfilm at IMDb. I could go on and on and on and on. There's a lot of them. So there's also another article in here called on Disney Star Wars is dumb at .wordpress.com, the Kerry Hart cover-up. In January 2019, producer of the episode Backlash documentary Mark John discovered that Kerry Hart was missing from the Lucasfilm.com website. All mention of her had been scrubbed, and continuing efforts to remove record of her affiliation with Lucasfilm continued to occur. The list of blog posts below chronicles this development. Once again, I'm not going to read all these out. Head on over to Disney Star Wars is Dumb and check them out for yourself. So, getting back to it, most of the recent hires at Lucasfilm were PC driven. Just Google Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm and there are bound to pop up many images of her promoting feminism. The worst is the Star Wars ranch photo where she is sitting in a chair at the Skywalker Ranch on the porch, surrounded by her new all-female employees. Or the one where she has her arms around a bunch of women all wearing the Force is female t-shirts. No bitch, the Force is for everyone. There is clearly an obsession with diversity, social justice and political correctness. They're obviously not concerned with good storytelling or creating memorable new characters or locations. So why, you may ask, is an entertainment company interested more in social issues than the entertainment they claim to care about? So this is taken directly off Lucasfilm.com website. This is the Lucasfilm history. This is found in the Who We Are section under Our Story. Lucasfilm is among the world's leading entertainment service companies, a pioneer in visual effects and sound across multiple mediums, and is home to the legendary Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises. Founded by visionary filmmaker George Lucas in 1971, Lucasfilm established as a rebel base of sorts in San Francisco's Bay Area, a place the filmmaker chose to shake up the status quo of how movies were made and what they were about. It was a defiant departure from the Hollywood mainstream and a more conducive atmosphere to cultivate his independent spirit of filmmaking. With money earned from his third motion picture in 1977, blockbuster Star Wars, 1977's blockbuster Star Wars, Lucas was able to construct Skywalker Ranch in San Francisco's North Bay in the early 1980s, a place where filmmakers could work together, sharing ideas and experience. Dreams are extremely important. You can't do it unless you imagine it. George Lucas. Basing his Skywalker sound facility at the ranch, Lucas moved Industrial Light and Magic, his special effects company, based in Los Angeles, to nearby San Rafael, allowing him to keep his production facilities and special effects house in close proximity to each other. In 2005, Lucas brought Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic together at the Letterman Digital Arts Center at the Presidio in San Francisco. 6 years later, in 2012, he handed the company's reins over to the renowned producer Kathleen Kennedy, who has since opened up an exciting new era of Lucasfilm by returning it to its production studio roots. Bullshit. When Lucasfilm was acquired by Disney that same year, Kennedy worked to enhance the company's collaborative spirit, building a creative community of writers, directors, artists, and filmmakers. Lucasfilm draws on the vast pool of skilled, world-class talent found in San Francisco and around the world, allowing it to create the top-notch entertainment experiences it has been known for. Well, if I was a naive moron, I would have believed that. So, why do you have this Lucasfilm story group made up of very inexperienced individuals? Why are all the hires after the 2012 takeover grossly inexperienced to do the job? Why didn't they hire the best people for the job? There must be millions of people working in the film industries around the world who would be much better suited to these positions. Lucasfilm has always been about doing things differently, being independent and not reliant on the mainstream Hollywood system to make movies and effects and sounds and stuff. But it's completely the opposite now. The biggest production company I think on the planet owns everything now. Disney. Disney has brought Star Wars, it has brought Marvel, it's brought 20th Century Fox. It is brought and controlling any other huge studio that's to compete with it. How does this still maintain the core values of an independent film studio? It doesn't. It pisses in the face of everything George Lucas pioneered and struggled to create. In my opinion, this was Kathleen Kennedy's motive all along, to upset the balance of the Star Wars brand and empire by using Star Wars as a platform for social justice. As to why she is doing this is unknown. Maybe she really believes this shit, or she thinks she needs to do something to equal the gender gap in Hollywood. It's evident that it has, gone to the complete opposite way under her. Maybe she has been caught up in the Me Too bullshit, or maybe she is just one of the typical Hollywood producers that think the rest of the world think like they do and believe they're morally more superior than the average Joe. Despite the fact that these people live in their ivory towers and have no clue what actually is happening in the real world, whatever her reasons were, she has just proved how a unhinged person in a position of power perverted their power to manipulate their employees, customers and products in an effort to brainwash the customers and media into believing their own ignorant worldview. We have seen this time and time again by these huge companies, Apple, Google, YouTube, Facebook, PayPal, just to name a few. So let's get a bit of background on Kathleen Kennedy. She is by no means someone who knows what it is like to struggle or fight for something. She's a typical entitled rich woman who thinks she is hard done by because men are still working in Hollywood. She is an expert in manipulation and the art of pulling the wool over people's eyes. She has fooled George Lucas, Steven Spielberg for decades. Now time for a quick Wikipedia info update on Kathleen Kennedy, the super producer. Kathleen Kennedy is an American film producer and president of Lucasfilm. In 1981, she co-founded a production company, Amblin Entertainment, with Steven Spielberg and husband Frank Marshall. Her first film as a producer was E.T. the Extraterrestrial. She subsequently produced Jurassic Park franchise, the first two of which became two of the top 10 highest grossing films of the 1990s. In 1992, she co-founded the Kennedy Marshall Company with her husband Frank Marshall. On October 30th, 2012, she became the president of Lucasfilm after the Walt Disney Company acquired the company for over $4 billion. She received the Irving G. Thalberg Award from the Academy of Motion Picture Sciences and Arts in 2018. Overall, Kennedy participated in the making of 60 films, mostly as an executive producer. She garnered 8 Academy Award nominations and over $11 billion worldwide, including 3 of the highest grossing films in motion picture history. Kennedy is second only to Spielberg in domestic box office receipts with over $7 billion as of January 2018. During the 1980s and 90s, Kennedy served as an advisory board on the National Student Film Institute, and in 1991 was awarded the Women in Film Crystal Award for outstanding women who, through their endurance and the excellence of their work, have helped to expand the role of women within the entertainment industry. In 2007, she was the first recipient of Women in Film's Paltrow Mentorship Award for showing extraordinary commitment to mentoring and supporting the next generation of filmmakers and executives. In 2005, she was a producer on 2 of Spielberg's films, War of the Worlds and Munich, the latter which earned her an Academy Award nomination. Marshall and Kennedy were producers of the US version of Studio Ghibli animated features, Ponyo, don't know what the fuck that is, and The Secret World of Arity. She also produced Spielberg's Lincoln in 2012, which was nominated for 7 Golden Globes and 12 Academy Awards. In May 2012, she stepped down from Kennedy Marshall, leaving Marshall as sole principal of their film company. In the following month, Kennedy became co-chair of Lucasfilm Limited alongside George Lucas. When Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, Kennedy was promoted to president. Kennedy sits on the board of governors of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Producers Branch. From 01 to 2 period, she was co-president with Tim Gibbons of the Producers Guild of America. 2018, Kennedy's contract remains president of Lucasfilm and extended for another 3 years. 2019, she was appointed honorary commander of the Order of the British Empire for services to film production in the United Kingdom. I'll make the argument that she probably knows how to produce a film. She's obviously very good at it. However, is she the right person to run a multi-billion-dollar company? Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Alright, so enough of Kathleen. On to some of the brainwashed bunch of Lucasfilm employees. Let's start with a guy who has one of the worst names on the fucking planet. That's none other than Chuck Wendig. I'm not making that up, that is actually this cunt's name. Social media is nothing new at this stage. Millions of people use it. There are a lot of celebrities who use it and have built their careers on it. There is also a dark side to it, namely trolls and people just being cunts to one another. So it's no surprise that Lucasfilm and Disney employees have taken to Twitter to hash it out with real Star Wars fans who have something to say about all the bullshit that has been happening in Star Wars since Kennedy took over. Mr. Wendig has been very vocal on Twitter. He is what you would call a online bully. This guy is a complete piece of shit. This is another supposed professional that acts like a petty spoilt child or a schoolyard bully and goes on social media to voice their opinion that nobody asked for. He has aggressively harassed Twitter users who have criticised him, but what got him in hot water was his political tweets, mainly focused on the Trump administration. Yet another Disney employee who is a far leftist loony. What is it about these employees and political allegiances? Does it really matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, a Trump supporter, a Hillary supporter, whoever the fuck supporter, if you're not in the United States? Does it really fucking matter? You're filmmakers and comic book writers. Politics shouldn't come into it. If you're so concerned with politics, become a politician. Chuck is a writer and has written several Star Wars books. He started writing for Star Wars in 2015, and as of 2018 he was working on Star Wars Shadow of Vader series of comics before he was let go by Marvel Comics in the wake of the James Gunn pedo storm tweet. James Gunn is the writer-director of Guardians of the Galaxy, who was fired from Marvel for pedophilic tweets and posts. Look it up. He says some pretty sick shit. It's kind of hard to differentiate whether it was a joke or whether he meant it. Either way, it's probably not a smart idea voicing that stuff on Twitter, especially when you are a employee of Disney and you have that kind of mindset. So this guy is so woke, he has created LGBTQ characters in his books just to show how diverse he is. Now, I'm all for that. Yeah, have LGBTQ characters. I don't really give a fuck. But if he's doing that just to show how diverse it is, or just to push some agenda, if he's doing it because he doesn't believe in it or it doesn't affect him directly, he's doing that just to be diverse for the sake of diversity. He doesn't care about LGBTQ people. I mean, where are you marching with them in the street, demonstrating? Are you supporting them in their struggles? No, you're not. You're voicing your opinion because you think it's the popular opinion of Hollywood and the media industry. That does more damage to LGBTQ rights than if you hadn't said anything. You're putting diversity in your comics for diversity's sake. So this guy is so woke, he has even created LGBTQ characters in his books just to show how diverse he is. Star Wars is for everyone, period. He has alienated the Star Wars fan base and pushed the SJW agenda in his works, and is quite the nasty Twitter troll. This will give you a bit more background. This is an article from the Washington Post called "How a Star Wars Writer's Tweets Got Him Fired by Marvel." This is by Michael Canva, October 19, 2018. Yeah, check this out. Just check out the picture of this guy. This guy looks like a fucking unhinged fucking lunatic. He looks like a complete fucking wacko. He looks like a typical enraged, incensed social justice warrior who's high in their own power, and the thought of anyone else's opinion pushes these people over the edge. He looks like a fucking lunatic. Just 2 weekends ago, Chuck Wendig was on stage at New York Comic Con, proudly helping Marvel Entertainment announce the new Star Wars comic book series he was writing, Shadow of Vader. Since that unveiling, however, the best-selling author has been fired by Marvel for his social media use. Received threats serious enough that he says he required a police escort in public. Yeah, whatever. You're not the fucking president. And this week, seen his 5-issue Shadow of Vader disappear from Marvel's January 2019 release schedule. Each major development this month has caught Wendig by surprise. It all began October 6 when Wendig unleashed a tweet storm, as Judge Brett M. Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court after allegations of sexual assault in the 1980s. There will be renewed calls for civility. Ignore them, the author said. In a protest urging tweet that was shared nearly 18,000 times, Wendig proceeded to use profanity when referring to Kavanaugh, President Trump, and the Republican leadership, saying that they have shamed victims and have helped dismantle democracy. Who's helping to dismantle democracy by alleviating one's right to free speech? That's none other than tech companies who are mostly run by extreme leftists. So, like, this guy gets incensed by what someone else's freedom of speech allows him to say. He gets so incensed and calls for violence against these people, but then can't understand why he gets fired for inciting said violence or saying something about someone's free speech. So, like, these people are just so enraged that other people have their own opinions and can voice their own opinions. Back to it. By the next day, his political tweets were drawing blowback from well-known conservative figures, including the Oscar-nominated actor James Woods and baseball great Curt Schilling. And last Friday, he tweeted that Marvel editor Mark Panisa had fired him for those tweets. The reason, my politics, the vulgarity used to express them, and the negativity of it all, Windig told the Washington Post. This is from his Twitter. So here's the thing that has happened. I just got fired from Marvel, taken off issues 4 and 5 for Shadow of Vader, and taken off an as yet unannounced Star Wars book. This might be a long thread, so apologies in advance. Oh, sense. Did it to yourself, you fucking idiot. Windig, author of the best-selling Star Wars Aftermath novels and Star Wars The Force Awakens adaptation, said he had completed scripts for the 3 of the planned 5 Shadow of Vader issues, a mini-series that would offer different viewpoints of Darth Vader. Prominent writers such as David Simon and N.K. Jemisin criticized Marvel's decision on social media. Marvel declined to comment Thursday about the status of the miniseries and Windig's work on it. The author says he has no idea as to the series' status, including whether its release is being delayed. Windig said he did not anticipate that his Twitter use would lead to his dismissal from Marvel. No one warned me, he said. Nothing about what I was doing was particularly different for me. In fact, the tweet thread that got attention wasn't particularly different from anything I had tweeted before. It was a kind of a rehash of stuff I'd already said, almost word for word. It was inflammatory, he added, but really nothing out of line with what other artisans of vulgarity might tweet. His Marvel termination came nearly 3 months after Disney, Marvel's parent, fired Guardians of the Galaxy franchise director James Gunn over tweets from years past that he called attempts at shock humour. Gunn is now working on a Suicide Squad sequel project for Warner Brothers DC. Like anyone asked for a Suicide Squad sequel project. Windig said such a professional toll is definitely having a chilling effect among some creators. Since this happened to me, I've heard a number of other stories that aren't public of artists and writers who feel like they were silenced about their politics in particular, said the Pennsylvania-based novelist and screenwriter Colopsis. I like to hope this trend is heading nowhere, but I fear it's becoming a weaponizing thing, he added, especially given the ability for bots and sock puppets to add enough heat to cause a boilover, referring to automated and fake online identities, respectively. Okay. You're not that important, buddy. In the current social political climate, Windig said, he sees just how cumulative online forces can spark such a boilover. In his case, he points to online movements like Comicsgate and Gamergate, plus other conservative movements and the current administration. Added Windig, I think this overall thing is still moving toward a cultural movement, some crescendo we can't see yet. As for his own tweets that call for uncivil protests against Washington, I think the civil disobedience of the 60s and 70s is now treated as uncivil. That's what uncivil protest means, Windig. Protest is thought to be an ugly thing, and legislation across our last several presidents has worked to undo the bonds of righteous protest. For me, when I talk about the lack of civility, I mean that we shouldn't be shamed for being angry, for using vulgar words, for standing up and being counted and make our voices heard. It was though Twitter, it's worth nothing, that Windig first caught the attention of Marvel when he expressed interest in writing Star Wars books. Now that his Twitter use led to his Marvel firing, does he plan on continuing in comic books? I still want to write comics, I don't need to, and for me the career is in books, not comic books. But I thought I was maybe actually starting to get good at it, says Windig. Or at least aggressively okay, so I'm down for more. I'm hoping there will be opportunity in that direction going forward. Windig can't understand why he got fired for being a fucking prick to other people, but wants people of a certain political party removed and not to voice their opinion for pretty much the same thing. So in another article from TheVerge.com, Star Wars author Chuck Windig says he was fired by Marvel over vulgar tweets. This is really quite chilling, by Andrew Liptak, October 12th, 2018. I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm just going to go over some key points. So just a week after Marvel announced at New York Comic Con that Star Wars author Chuck Windig would be penning a Darth Vader miniseries. Windig says that he's been removed from the series, as well as from the announced Star Wars book after he was temporarily suspended from Twitter earlier this week. In a series of tweets, Windig noted that he was fired from the remainder of the series because of the negativity and vulgarity that my tweets bring. It was too much politics, too much vulgarity, too much negativity on my part. A Marvel spokesperson confirmed that Windig had been fired but wouldn't comment further on the record. We've reached out to Disney and Penguin Random House for additional comment and clarification, and we'll update this post if we hear back. Windig went on to outline a long-running campaign of harassment that accompanied 2015's Aftermath, the first novel in the new canon set between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. Fans of the defunct expanded universe were upset that his books were replacing the long-running series, while others took issue with the outspoken progressive political views. Windig has written for Marvel before, writing the comic adaptation of The Force Awakens, and he wrote issues of Marvel's series Hyperion. Yeah, you don't understand why people are pissed off. The fans had the expanded universe taken away, then replaced with Disney canon, and authors like you who are pushing the diversity agenda that is driven by Disney, and you understand why people are upset. Earlier this week, Windig reported that he discovered on Monday that his Twitter account had been temporarily suspended, which lasted for 5 hours. He suspected it was due to a tweet storm about civility. In the aftermath of the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh that went viral, it earned him the ire of numerous right-wing personalities, along with threats and calls for him to be fired from his Star Wars gig. Well, that's what these people do to other people. They can't accept that they won an argument. They have to get these people fired from they're so petty. It's the amount of energy these people fucking put into this shit. You could be changing the world for a positive, not trying to ruin people's careers because of a difference of opinion. So misconstruing his tweets as a literal call for violence. Well, what else is it, idiot? Windig's firing set a disturbing precedent for creators, and it specifically recalls the firing of James Gunn from his director position of Guardians of the Galaxy 3 after a right-wing troll campaign churned up some offensive tweets that he posted a decade ago. While Windig notes that this appears to have been Marvel's call, there are stark similarities and a concerning takeaway. Entertainment companies will cave to a bad faith campaigns if the volume is cranked up high enough, while a source close to the matter noted that the online campaigning for Windig's ouster from the franchise didn't figure into the decision. It's impossible to see these circles claim it was anything but a victory. Okay, so now we come to Freddie Prinze Jr. Remember this cunt from I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scooby-Doo? He is another one of the deplorable Lucasfilm employees who have taken to Twitter to outcast true Star Wars fans and push Disney's diversity agenda. He famously tweeted that Star Wars doesn't need any more white dudes. Really? Coming from a guy who is a white dude. Rian Johnson has said very similar things. Good old Ryan gets on his soapbox to voice his opinion whenever he feels like he needs some attention. It's okay for these cunts to go on social media and abuse anyone who doesn't agree with their warped view of things. What about respecting others' views and opinions? You may not like what someone else has to say, but they have the right to say it. It's a different story when real Star Wars fans don't agree with these fuckheads. They hate anyone who supports the right. If you're a Star Wars fan and you're a Trump supporter, you are scum to them. It's okay for them to say, we need less white dudes in Star Wars, but you are white dudes in Star Wars who have got the opportunity to be in a Star Wars film, and you're using that fucking privilege to get on a soapbox and criticize people for voicing opinions and to say stupid things like Star Wars doesn't, we need less white dudes in Star Wars. Fuck off. How hypocritical is that? You're white guys in Star Wars. If you are so outraged by this, why don't you give up your position in Star Wars and give it to a minority of your choice? But no, you don't do that because the paycheck that Disney gives you is too fucking good. If it wasn't for Disney's paycheck, Freddie Prinze Jr. and Rian Johnson, you'd be on the fucking street. You're a talentless piece of fucking shit. This is just another example of the extreme left and how tolerant they are to others. Back to Greedy Prince. Freddie Prinze Jr. voiced the character of Kanan Jarrus. He is another one that has no respect for real fans or Star Wars in general, and he only adds fuel to the fan war fire. Freddie has also taken to Twitter to launch attacks on anyone who disagrees with his fucking stupid point of view. So, another quick article, I'm getting this from Disney Star Wars is Dumb. This has a collection of his Freddie Prinze Jr.'s tweets. One of his tweets reads, I just read a tweet at Pablo Hidalgo, he's a author who writes for Star Wars, complaining about young Han Solo not looking or sounding like Harrison Ford. Hashtag please be real tweet. Well, stands to reason that if Han Solo is played by Harrison Ford, you want to cast someone who looks and sounds like Harrison Ford to play a younger version of Harrison Ford. Not that hard to work out, Freddie. This is continued. Saber, always remember a whole bunch of average, out-of-shape white guys fantasized for decades about Han giving them the Falcon. Then, wait for it, he gave it to a girl. The horror, let them cry and moan. Take joy in their misplaced pain and grief. Go fuck yourself, Freddie Prinze Jr. That was April 9, 2018. Han didn't give the Falcon away, he was killed. Big difference. Rey might use it, but it's still being flown and owned by Chewbacca. Here's another tweet. Bring it, you professional hack. You people seem to forget that if it weren't for the fans, you wouldn't have a job. Freddie replies, bring what? Your opinion doesn't matter? That sounds mean, but it isn't. It honestly means nothing. They have a business plan, it's working, and peeps like you don't like it, end of story. So bitch and moan and play the wannabe tough guy, it doesn't matter. Well, if enough fans don't buy your products, then you don't have a fucking job. That's what these asswipes gotta fucking remember. Look, I get it, it's disempowering to hear, but the fact remains the plan existed before fan opinion and hasn't changed during, and the hundreds of millions already made prove they are right. But I get where you're coming from, it sucks to hear stuff like that. Nah, they'll all do good business, the company makes hundreds of millions of dollars per year through toys and movies and constant sold out resorts since adding Star Wars. It's a strong business model and they won't ever cater to the hardcore. That's a minority. Hashtag show business. Yeah, maybe that's true. That is how these people work. This is how Disney does business. This is how Hollywood does business. But at the same time, this guy doesn't have to rub salt into the wounds. So, whether he's right or not, at the same time, enough fans stop buying, business slows. I hear you, the only opinions that don't count are the ones offered by the tweet. The ones who feel it's their job to protect art they don't own. It's a working business model, it won't change ever. So he goes on and on and on and on. Now enter the hero of our story, Ethan Van Sciver. Ethan is a comic book artist and social media personality, whether you like him or not. He has the balls to stand up to the lunatics online and at Lucasfilm. He has been a fierce opponent of Chuck Wendig and a central figure of the Comic Gate movement. Ethan has gone head-to-head with Rian Johnson recently. According to his Wikipedia page, Ethan Van Sciver is an American comic artist and social media personality. He is known for illustrating or drawing covers for a number of superhero titles, primarily for DC and also Marvel Comics. So he has a lot to do with something called Comics Gate. So if you want to look that up, look it up on your own time. So Ethan is a key figure in the Comics Gate scandal. Van Sciver has been a central figure in Comics Gate, a controversial movement in opposition to what he sees as forced diversity, regressive politics, and anti-consumer practices in the content of North American superhero comic books and the kinds of creators who work in the industry, which has been described by detractors as an online harassment campaign. I'll leave it up to you to research that further. So this is an article I've got from comicbook.news. So this outlines the war between Ethan and Rian Johnson. Right, so this is an article called Rian Johnson versus Ethan Van Sciver. Twitter explodes over Star Wars. Matt McGloin. Posted 6th of the 24th, 2019. Things are getting ugly on Twitter as Star Wars The Last Jedi director Rian Johnson is again tweeting snarky comments, which also includes tweets directed at former DC Comics comic book artist Ethan Van Sciver. If you recall, back when Disney first fired James Gunn, Rian Johnson proceeded to delete more than 20,000 of his own tweets. I wonder why. But now Johnson is back on Twitter with his questionable comments. Does that mean Rian Johnson is no longer with Disney and that his Star Wars trilogy has been cancelled? It is thought Disney has a social media policy about its creators harassing fans and posting questionable tweets, but Johnson seems to no longer care about the code of conduct. The latest sees Rian Johnson, who wasn't tagged in this post, supporting a Twitter user, Matt Zola Seats, who mentions how he is going to harass other fans about not liking Star Wars The Last Jedi. Classic example of him being an unprofessional twat. Feeling a bit cranky today, so I'm going into threads where people unnecessarily talk shit about The Last Jedi and letting them know that I think it's a classic that only gains from repeat viewings. Twitter user Matt Zola Seats tweeted, who claims to be a TV and film critic and editor of RogerEbert.com. Rian Johnson tweeted back his support, "I love you. These two are both fuckheads. They should really stick these two in a fucking space capsule and launch these cunts into the sun." Ethan Van Sciver, who is known for voicing his dissent for Disney and Rian Johnson's SJW approach to Star Wars The Last Jedi, pointed out that the film actually didn't get many repeat viewings, something I have pointed out myself, which is one reason why its box office failed to live up to J.J. Abrams' Star Wars The Force Awakens. Most films do gain from repeat viewings. The Last Jedi didn't get repeat viewings. It declined box office wise by nearly $1 billion versus The Force Awakens, because average film goers found it cynical and warped. They're correct. Defending it guns blazing is mentally ill. Ethan Van Sciver tweeted, "True to Sciver's words, The Last Jedi box office declined so much that Dwayne Johnson's Jumanji reboot actually performed better in the long run." Ethan Van Sciver also points out that his 8-year-old didn't like the movie. Note, following Star Wars The Last Jedi, its non-merchandise sales tanked, which I have pointed out many times, and Disney's consumer products division continues to be the only division that makes less and less money. Surely you must have better talking points than this movie, aimed primarily at selling action figures to children, is more profound, amazeballs, which repeated viewings. I'll tell you that to my 8-year-old, people hated the movie, Van Sciver tweeted. Matt Zola Zeitz user then gets really nasty with Ethan Van Sciver mentioning, "I wonder if they can help get your mum off me." Van Sciver didn't like that at all and responded to go back to at Rian Johnson and report that you got bitch smacked by a bunch of YouTubers. Matt Zola responded, "Wow, Ethan, I don't know your story until some comic fans told me about it. You gave up art for grifting. That's tragic. Why did you do it? What an incredible comic that would make." Note, Ethan Van Sciver actually is publishing his own creator-owned comic books and has raised upwards of $2 million. I believe the most ever for a crowd-funded comic. Ironically, Matt Zola is also trying to crowd raise funds for a book. He has only reached 16% of his goal. Rian Johnson got wind of Matt Zola's tweets and responded to Ethan Van Sciver, "Ethan, I can't hear you. Did you say something?" Ethan Van Sciver tweeted back, "Oh, there he is. Yeah, I said it's good to find out what it is you actually do love in place of Star Wars." Critics like Matt Zola Seats, who brag about bullying the fans for you while telling them he's fucking their mothers, come get your boy. Yes, that's comicbook.news. You can read the full article there and see all the deplorable tweets written back and forth between these two. I also found this on Disney Star Wars is dumb.wordpress.com. Ethan Van Sciver's Star Wars sex scandal video series. This one's pretty interesting. This kind of factors into the James Gunn debacle. There's a whole series of videos you can find on YouTube made by, I think, Ethan Van Sciver, who has pointed out all these sex abuse scandals by employees of Disney and Lucasfilm. I haven't watched all of them, but There's way too many of them. So these videos were based partly on anonymous tips from D and others, and my own work in the following blogs. So if you go over to Disney Star Wars is dumb at .wordpress.com, it basically chronicles the sex abuse scandal of Disney and Lucasfilm employees, namely people in the publishing world. So moving along, he has also brought to light the sex scandals that have caused more than a few problems for Star Wars and Disney. So as I previously mentioned, there's the James Gunn controversy, but there's also a Disney employee, I can't remember his name, who has had some questionable Facebook posts. I mean, is this the avenue that Disney is going to continue down? Are they so far gone that they are trying to normalize child abuse and pedophilia? It seems to me that they hire a lot of people who have been either suspected or convicted of this. I mean, this is really questionable from a company that makes children's films. The extreme left want pedos included in the LGBT community, as if they don't have enough to deal with at the moment. By the way, this is a sex-positive show, peace and love all around the world. This is not a dig at the LGBT community. Don't have a problem with you, I do have a problem with fucking pedophiles. They have no right being categorized as humans. They should all be taken out of the population. I get Ethan's point of view. Forced diversity, in my opinion, is destroying art forms from movies, TV, publishing and games. I don't have a problem with gay or minority characters as long as they're done well and portrayed realistically and not as stereotypes or dropped in a story for the sake of it. Respect the character. It's not an opportunity for writers and producers to show how woke they are. It's not an ego stroke. I mean, if you're going to put these characters into movies or make characters, do it realistically, do it properly, honor these people. Don't make their light of their struggles just for the sake of, let's just show how woke we are. Let's show how diverse we are by putting this into films and stuff. Do it respectfully. These people have been through enough. Like, if you want to have female characters, fine. Write the best female character that has ever been written. Write the best gay character that's ever been written. Most fans don't have a problem with this. They just want realism and respect done to these characters. In closing, the blame for the shit show that has been Disney Star Wars must fall on Kathleen Kennedy and Disney's shoulders. Kathleen Kennedy in particular deserves the credit for the destruction of the greatest IP in history. Disney Star Wars has ignored the true fans, not admitted fault and pushed agendas. They have ignored the basic foundation of what Star Wars is and is all about. At its core, Star Wars is an epic story about good versus evil, freedom over oppression, and lastly, but most importantly, it is a story of friendship, courage, sacrifice, and facing one's fears for the greater good. These themes Disney and Kathleen Kennedy have chosen to forget. The other core value they have missed is the heroes and the villains need help, and there is a nobility and a truth in receiving and helping someone. George Lucas wrote characters that were real and relatable. Luke was willing to sacrifice his Jedi training and even his life in order to help Leia and Han. Leia needed help escaping the Death Star. This doesn't take away from her strengths or the character, it only added to it. This doesn't make her a weak character for needing help, it makes her realistic. Han needed help at the end of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Vader needed the help of his son in order to come back to the light side and shed the oppression of the Sith. Even the story's central character needed help. Lucas helped and guided the entire trilogy. If it weren't for Obi-Wan, he would still be on Tatooine. Han saved him in Empire Strikes Back, and Vader sacrificed himself in order to save his son in Return of the Jedi. The fact that these characters needed help doesn't make them weak, it makes them real. There is not a person living, or in history for that matter, that hasn't needed help. Kathleen Kennedy and Disney chose stereotypes and diversity over good storytelling. The trilogy we got is not the one the fans deserved. A reunion of Luke, Han, Leia, Lando and Chewie would have been the single greatest moment for a Star Wars fan to see our heroes reunited again. The sequel trilogy has only made fans appreciate the originals even more than they already did. It has also made fans that didn't like the prequel trilogy appreciate it even more and look at it in a new light. George Lucas's vision has enriched millions of lives around the globe. uniting humans from different countries, creeds, and races with his timeless and universal story of good and evil, hope and tragedy. Nothing can take away from us the magic of the original trilogy or the prequels. These movies will live forever. Disney and Kathleen Kennedy can never take away the impact that Star Wars has had. The magic of George Lucas's world will live on with fans around the world. The characters, places, and events that George Lucas created over 40 years ago are still alive to this day. The fire that is Star Wars is burning brighter than ever. May the Force be with you. So that concludes part 4 of Star Wars: The Betrayal of the Mouse. I hope you all enjoyed it. That also concludes this podcast. Thank you very much for listening to the end. So, if you're liking the show and you would like to support the Truth Tank, remember to follow the Facebook page, subscribe to the Truth Tank on iTunes and Podbean, like, rate, review, and share. These are the biggest ways you can help the Truth Tank grow. Share it on your social media platforms, share it in emails. If you know someone who might like it, who might get a kick out of it, let them know about it. So once again, thank you for everyone for listening to the past few episodes on Star Wars. And it's a bit different to how I said this show was going to go, but I felt like I needed to say it. I've said it. It's time to move on. So the next show we will be taking a trip back in time. I'm not going to tell you what it is or where we're going, but it's going to be a cool show. It's going to be a historical based show. Thank you for listening. I am the Tank. This is the Truth. May the truth be with you.